in the vast and intricately layered world of The Witcher, a world carved by war, legends, and the uncertain hands of fate, few forces cast as long and enduring a shadow as the Nilfgaardian Empire. Rising steadily and silently from the southern lands, the Empire does not announce itself with sudden violence or barbarous spectacle, but rather with the creeping inevitability of an eclipsing sun. Its legions do not merely conquer, they organize, they administer, they persist. To many in the northern kingdoms, Nilfgaard is the harbinger of ruin, the dark tide threatening to sweep away ancient customs and fragile sovereignties. But to others, especially those whose lives have been defined by famine, disorder, and the careless squabbles of northern monarchs, Nilfgaard represents a structure, a method, a solution. And so, beneath the black banners adorned with the golden sun, there exists not only the clang of war and the cruelty of occupation, but also the quiet hum of bureaucratic control, economic reform, and social stabilization. In this lullaby of empires, we shall drift through the slow-moving current of history, prophecy, genetics, politics, and quiet, imperial inevitability. Let us begin. To understand Nilfgaard not merely as a nation, but as an existential force, one must begin at the beginning, not of its wars, nor of its emperors, but of its ideology, its people, and the soil from which its iron discipline sprouted. The Nilfgaardian Empire was once, quite simply, a city, a single settlement on the southern reaches of the known world, near the Yaruga River, isolated by geography and underestimated by its northern neighbors. The name Nilfgaard itself, in the Elder tongue, loosely translates to Golden Land, or Land of the Setting Sun. The early inhabitants of this city-state were not conquerors by nature, but survivors, hardened by adversity and unified by necessity. Surrounded by tribes and hostile terrain, the Nilfgaardians developed an unusual respect for structure. Tribal councils gave way to centralized authority. Custom evolved into codified law, and from this small bastion of order, the seeds of empire were sown. The first emperors were not remembered for glory, but for consolidation. Roads were built, languages standardized. Tribes absorbed not through slaughter, but through agreement and strategic marriage. What began as a city became a province. What became a province formed a dominion. Slowly, and without the drama often associated with imperial origin myths, Nilfgaard became an empire, not in title alone, but in essence. Its core principle, a belief that chaos is weakness, and only order can ensure survival. While the northern kingdoms flourished in their fractious way, marked by petty wars and short dynasties, Nilfgaard grew more methodically. Its bureaucracies deepened, its armies professionalized, its record-keeping improved. Entire generations were born into a society that valued obedience, tradition, and efficiency over freedom, variance, or debate. It was not an empire of the soul, but an empire of the system. It is important to emphasize that in the early stages of its rise, Nilfgaard rarely engaged in open war. It absorbed more than it conquered. Villages and regions would often capitulate willingly, seduced not by fear, but by the promise of roads, of trade, of protection. In many ways, the empire's greatest weapon was not the sword, but the ledger, Furthermore, the Nilfgaardian sense of cultural superiority began to take root. To them, the north was a splintered, immature frontier, full of infighting barons, half-empty treasuries, and ungovernable lands. The north was wild. Nilfgaard was civilized. And this belief, over time, would come to justify the Empire's most aggressive acts. The legal code of Nilfgaard, known in later times as the Codex Imperial, outlined with exhaustive precision how lands should be governed, how disputes should be resolved, and how loyalty should be maintained. Titles were earned, not inherited. Merit was valued over birthright. This system, while undoubtedly rigid and often unmerciful, introduced a strange kind of fairness to those who had long lived under arbitrary rule. Yet, as with all systems born from rigid logic, it lacked room for dissent. And so, while Nilfgaard promised order, it also demanded compliance. The people of annexed territories were often re-educated. Local traditions were discouraged or banned. Elven and dwarven communities, already suffering marginalization in the north, found little sanctuary in the empire, which viewed racial diversity as a potential source of unrest. Nevertheless, one cannot dismiss the appeal of predictability. In many regions, Nilfgaard brought a sudden end to local famines by establishing grain quotas. In plague-ridden towns, imperial doctors enforced health ordinances with brutal but effective precision. In places where bandits once roamed, imperial patrols established security. The benefits were real, though the cost was always the same: autonomy. And so, in this slow-burning history, we see the dual nature of Nilfgaard begin to emerge. It is not a realm of cruelty for cruelty's sake, nor a champion of virtue. It is a machine, mechanical, calculating, and determined. It does not ask if something is good or bad. It asks only if it is functional. The rise of Nilfgaard is not a story of dramatic battles or noble rebellions. It is a story of paperwork, census forms, irrigation ditches, and tax reform. It is a story of an empire whose true conquest begins not on the battlefield, but in the silence after, when the banners are raised and the new order begins to file its reports. And so, with this foundation laid, we now turn our attention to the emperor, not merely as a man, but as a symbol of this relentless ideology. A leader forged not only by prophecy, but by the weight of generational purpose. Let us continue. To many in the north, Nilfgaard is synonymous with tyranny. And yet, beneath the weight of war and imperial ambition lies a moral paradox, difficult to ignore. The empire does not merely conquer for spoils. It reforms. It restructures. It brings with it roads, taxes, order, and often peace after the bloodshed. In the cities that fall under Nilfgaardian control, there are as many beneficiaries as there are victims. Merchants find stability. Laws are enforced with ruthless consistency. Petty kings are replaced by appointed governors who answer directly to the emperor, not to ancient bloodlines or regional interests. Crime, though not eradicated, is punished efficiently. Infrastructure expands. Education is standardized. Yet, this order is bought with silence. Dissent is unwelcome. Autonomy is reduced. Cultures are absorbed or erased. And though stability follows Nilfgaard's banner, it is not always a peaceful one. It is instead a coerced calm. the kind that breeds resentment beneath the surface. Still, for some, it is a better alternative. To live under Nilfgaard is to trade chaos for certainty, to trade the unpredictable cruelty of a northern lord for the regulated oppression of an imperial structure. This complexity is central to understanding the empire. Nilfgaard is not evil in the traditional sense. It is a force of structure in a world that otherwise decays. It may bring peace, but not without cost. And for many, that cost is identity. As you breathe in gently now, let your mind trace the edges of that thought. Order without justice. Peace without freedom. The black sun rises not with fire, but with cold purpose. The arrival of Nilfgaard in the northern kingdoms was not a sudden explosion of violence, nor a single dramatic invasion. Rather, it was a slow pressure, a calculated expansion, a methodical application of political gravity. Over decades, the empire prepared not only its armies, but its scribes, its supply chains, and its civil administrators. When war finally came, it was not just an act of aggression. It was an extension of policy, a movement toward inevitability. To the north, Nilfgaard appeared alien. It was not ruled by quarrelsome barons or whimsical kings. It did not host tourneys or entertain bards or indulge superstition. It moved with direction. Its soldiers did not loot because they were paid. Its commanders did not bribe because they were audited. Its tax collectors were not arbitrary because they operated under code. And so, when Nilfgaard marched into Sintra, then Sodden, then beyond, the world watched with unease. The armies of the north, fragmented and undisciplined, struggled to match Nilfgaard's precision. Temeria and Redania fielded knights whose armour shone, whose banners waved, and who died swiftly. Cedwyn sent thousands to the front and lost thousands more to poor coordination. The First War ended not with a final blow, but with exhaustion, a truce, a pause. Nilfgaard, content for the moment, consolidated. Occupation followed. It is in this occupation, not merely in war, that the true nature of Nilfgaard reveals itself. When Nilfgaard takes a region, it does not burn it to the ground. It registers it. It counts its people. It maps its roads. It assesses its grain production. It evaluates local infrastructure. Then it restructures. Local nobles are removed unless they swear loyalty. Courts are replaced with imperial magistrates. The Nilfgaardian language is made official. Schools are reformed. Trade is regulated. The result is not chaos, but an eerie stability. Farmers are told what to plant, when to harvest, and how much to tithe. Merchants are issued permits. Toll roads are introduced. Taxation is formalized. Resistance is punished, but efficiency is rewarded. To many peasants, the change is tolerable, sometimes even welcome. Under their old lords, taxes came irregularly, often doubled without warning, and paid for feasts instead of roads. Under Nilfgaard, the demands are firm, but predictable. A farmer knows what is expected. A widow knows what her bread costs. A village knows how many soldiers it must host, and for how long. There is no negotiation, but there is also no guessing. And yet, for every benefit, there is loss. Cultural erasure begins subtly. Regional festivals are cancelled, local songs banned, historical symbols removed, temples repurposed, languages suppressed. Stories begin to vanish, replaced by imperial narratives. The people are not only ruled, they are redefined. Identity is rewritten in bureaucratic terms, as subjects, not citizens, as labourers, not communities, as statistics, not voices. Resistance movements do arise. Underground networks pass information. Former soldiers become bandits. Priests hide relics. But the cost is high. Nilfgaard's intelligence services, the Vicavarian network and the secret police, are meticulous. They infiltrate. They listen. They disappear dissent quietly, without spectacle. A rebellion may rise, but it seldom rises twice. In Ireton, an entire town is wiped from the map after harbouring rebels. In Lyria, an orphanage is repurposed as a re-education centre. In Verdun, a book of northern poetry is declared seditious, and its author vanishes. These events are not exceptions. They are instructions to others. Yet the Empire does not see this as cruelty. To its officials, it is maintenance. Cleaning, necessary pruning of a disordered garden. It is not hatred that drives them, but belief. Belief in a unified, orderly world. A belief that disorder, left alone, becomes suffering. Still, Nilfgaard's order is not invulnerable. It breeds resentment. It incites silence, but not always loyalty. In some villages, children speak Nilfgaardian at school and revert to their mother tongue at home. In the cities, pamphlets circulate in secret. Resistance never truly ends. It simply slows. There are also cracks in the imperial system. Supply lines stretch too far. Corruption, though suppressed, still finds hidden corners. Generals disagree. Provinces grumble. The engine of empire, though powerful, requires fuel. Fuel in the form of people, grain, obedience, and time. In the end, Nilfgaard does not always hold what it conquers. Some regions, like Sintra, become symbols of occupation and symbols of rebellion. The north, chaotic though it may be, is not without memory. It remembers its kings, it remembers its stories, and it remembers when it was free. Still, as long as Nilfgaard exists, the question remains open. Is it better to live in freedom and chaos, or in order and silence? For many, the answer is unclear. At the very center of the tangled destinies that define the Witcher universe stands a single figure. Not a king, nor a warrior, nor even a sorcerer, but a girl. Cirilla Fiona Ellen Rhiannon, known to most as Ciri. She is not only a child of prophecy, she is the prophecy, a descendant of ancient bloodlines marked by fate, pursued by empires. And for the Nilfgaardian Empire, she is something more. Not a person to be known, but a key to be turned. To understand Nilfgaard's obsession with Ciri, one must begin not with politics, but with prophecy. Long ago, the elven seer Ithlin spoke of a coming frost, a time when the world would perish beneath ice, unless a child of the elder blood guided it to safety. Many dismissed this as myth. Others studied it in secret. But in the halls of Nilfgaard, especially under the reign of Emhyr var Emreis, it was taken with absolute seriousness. Ciri is of elder blood. a descendant of Lara Doran, an elven sorceress who once defied her people by loving a human. The bloodline that followed carried more than magic. It carried potential. The potential to open portals between worlds, to move through time, to manipulate the threads of destiny itself. In the hands of one who seeks control, such power is not a curiosity, it is a weapon. Emhyr's interest in Ciri is therefore not paternal. Though he is, in truth, her biological father, his intentions have little to do with family, affection, or reunion. To him, Ciri represents the convergence of empire and myth. If united with her, by marriage or by blood, he would secure not only dominion over the continent, but mastery over fate itself. A child born of that union, he believed, would be more than royal. It would be divine. Such thoughts, disturbing though they may seem, are entirely consistent with Emhyr's cold logic. He does not act from emotion. He acts from vision. And in his vision, the world must be remade. Not burned, not destroyed, but ordered, perfectly, completely, eternally. Through Ciri, he sees the possibility of a world where the chaos of magic and the unpredictability of mankind are brought under imperial design. But Ciri is not an object. She is a person, trained by witches, protected by sorceresses, hardened by experience. She does not bend easily. She flees capture again and again. She rejects the empire not with rebellion, but with elusiveness. She vanishes, escapes, reappears, always one step beyond Nilfgaard's grasp. And so, her story becomes a kind of silence within the empire, a silence that stretches across maps and through years. Emhyr continues to rule, but always with an absence at the center. The plan remains unfinished, the prophecy unclaimed, the future unshaped. There are whispers within the imperial court. Some say Emhyr has abandoned the pursuit. Others believe he waits, patient and still, knowing that destiny will bring her back. Scholars continue to study her bloodline. Mages draft rituals. Secret orders keep records of her movements. Entire units of soldiers are deployed not to fight wars, but to search, to follow rumors, to listen at the edge of the world. Outside of Nilfgaard, others also seek her. The Lodge of Sorceresses, the Northern Monarchs, elves in hiding. Each has their own idea of what she is and what she could become. But only Nilfgaard sees her as essential, as inevitable, as a requirement for the next age. There is a quiet danger in this kind of thinking. To make one person carry the burden of the world's design, to treat her not as a girl, but as a formula. Ciri resists not only capture, but this idea itself. She is not a prophecy, she is herself. And yet, prophecy lingers. The blood within her is ancient, her power still growing, her decisions still shaping events beyond her comprehension. Even her refusals have consequences. Nilfgaard waits. Its armies march and rest. Its cities grow and change. But the plan remains, somewhere beneath the throne. It is written in ledgers and studied in secret. A future built on her return, whether willingly or not. Ciri walks the world, and with each step she defies it. And in doing so, she becomes the only thing Nilfgaard cannot calculate. A single unknown in a system of certainty. And that, perhaps, is why she matters most of all. Let us now turn our attention to how the northern kingdoms respond, not only to Nilfgaard's power, but to the shadow of prophecy that surrounds both empire and girl. In the world of The Witcher, the Nilfgaardian Empire is more than a nation. It is a center of gravity. Every choice, every war, every political maneuver, no matter how distant, occurs within the field of its influence. Even when its legions rest and its banners do not rise, Nilfgaard exerts weight. It bends the will of kings. It shapes alliances. It defines the terms of diplomacy. It is, quite simply, the axis upon which the entire continent turns. In the early days of its expansion, Nilfgaard's presence was felt primarily through direct action. Its armies crossing the Yaruga, its agents undermining northern thrones, its coin disrupting regional markets. But as time passed, and as the borders of its empire extended, the nature of its influence changed. It no longer needed to march to conquer. Often, the mere threat of Nilfgaardian attention was enough to shift the kingdom's policy. Its shadow, once sharp and narrow, grew diffuse, encompassing not just provinces but patterns of behavior. Temeria, once proud and defiant, found itself adopting stricter laws, not only to manage internal unrest, but to project stability in the face of Nilfgaardian surveillance. Redania, under the ever-watchful Dijkstra, transformed into a state of constant preparation. Spy masters became more powerful than generals. Peace was not trusted. Every envoy from the south was viewed with suspicion, and every quiet season was interpreted not as relief, but as anticipation. Even Kedwen, a realm distant from the central theatres of war, became more militarized. Fortresses were reinforced, borders patrolled, trade regulated. The empire need not attack every kingdom to control it. In many cases, fear of conquest compelled preemptive submission, cultural, economic, or diplomatic. This gravitational pull also affected neutral parties. Skellige, the rugged archipelago of raiders and seafarers, long prided itself on isolation and independence. Yet as Nilfgaard's naval ambitions grew, Skellige too felt its tide shift. Some clans considered treaties, others prepared for war, but none could ignore the fact that Nilfgaard's ships would someday cross into their waters. In the taverns of Ard Skellig, sailors spoke less of storms and more of imperial sails on the horizon. Even magic, an elusive and often apolitical force, began to orbit around the empire's plans. The Brotherhood of Sorcerers, long fractured, began to sense the need for unity, not because of philosophical change, but because of existential necessity. Mages who once pursued individual goals found themselves caught in a rising current of imperial pressure. Those who cooperated with Nilfgaard received support. Those who resisted were hunted. And still, the empire did not boast. It did not need to. Its very existence created response. When Nilfgaard sneezed, the north tightened its cloak. When Nilfgaard paused, the north waited, breath held. This form of control, subtle, invisible, yet overwhelming, is the truest mark of imperial success. Influence becomes instinct. Foreign courts model themselves after Nilfgaard not by force, but by imitation. Bureaucracies reorganize. Coinage is standardized. Foreign emissaries learn the Nilfgaardian tongue, not by law, but by necessity. To trade, to negotiate, to survive, one must speak the language of the center. And so, the empire becomes not just a power, but a reference, a model, a measuring stick. This is not to say the entire world bows willingly. Resistance continues. Identity persists. Northern pride does not extinguish easily. But even resistance must acknowledge the rules of the game, rules set by Nilfgaard. Political marriages once forged for love or alliance are now calculated based on Nilfgaard's likely response. Wars are not begun without consulting maps that detail imperial supply lines. Even rebellions consult Nilfgaard's weaknesses before they act. In this way, the Empire's presence is paradoxical. It is both overbearing and invisible, obvious and subtle, oppressive and stabilizing. The paradox deepens further when one realizes that Nilfgaard, in shaping the world around it, also becomes shaped by that world. It must constantly adapt. It learns from its enemies. It refines its governance. It studies the rebellions it puts down and evolves. Its intelligence network expands. Its diplomacy becomes more nuanced. It sends not only generals, but cultural attachés. Not only gold, but theatre. Influence becomes layered, military, economic, philosophical, and all of it leads back to the capital, Nilfgaard City, the center of the map, not just a place but a concept. In The Witcher, characters often speak of Nilfgaard without needing to explain. It is understood. It is the weight behind every sentence, the context behind every fear, the destination behind every rumor. Even Geralt, who stands apart from politics, feels this gravity, not through allegiance, but through consequence. Beneath the gleaming armor, beyond the sweeping maps and shifting borders, lie the lives of ordinary people. Farmers, merchants, servants, and scribes. Those who do not choose empires but live beneath them. In the Nilfgaardian Empire, where control is precise and order is paramount, civilian life reflects the empire's deepest values: stability, predictability, obedience. For many, life under Nilfgaard is not filled with fear, but with rules. Rules that govern planting seasons, rules that define how many animals may be kept, rules that require grain to be stored in state barns, and that tax its distribution. There are laws for marriage, laws for property inheritance, laws for child education, and laws for morning market hours. Everything is accounted for. Everything is written down. A farmer in an imperial province rises before dawn, not because of tradition, but because his schedule is regulated. A bell from the district hall signals the start of the workday. Inspectors may arrive without notice to examine tools, record yields, or enforce sanitation standards. The farmer complies, not from fear necessarily, but because compliance is expected. It is the rhythm of life. Children are required to attend basic education. Imperial schools teach mathematics, record-keeping, state history, and language. Local legends and songs are discouraged. Discipline is emphasized. Uniformity is rewarded. Even laughter, though not banned, is quiet. Students learn to write in clear, formal script, to speak only when spoken to avoid questioning what is already decided. Merchants in Nilfgaard must register their stalls, mark their prices visibly, and submit transaction records monthly. Currency is standardized. Counterfeiting is a capital offense. Market guards patrol quietly, rarely intervening unless needed. Theft is rare. The cost of dishonesty is simply too high. In cities, life is cleaner. Not freer, but cleaner. Water is rationed through aqueducts. Waste disposal is mandatory. Streets are swept by labourers assigned by district order. Beggars are removed and placed into work camps. Temples must be registered and sermons pre-approved. Public speeches require permits. Songs in taverns are subject to censors. Bards who defy this can be arrested and sometimes simply vanish. Despite all this, many civilians describe their lives with a single word: safe. Banditry is low. Roads are patrolled. Taxes are high but consistent. Justice is strict but not whimsical. Crime is punished without delay. Even the poorest citizens know what to expect. There are no sudden raids, no unpaid soldiers looting their homes, no warlords taking their sons. There is, above all else, structure. For minority groups, however, the story is less simple. Elves and dwarves, already marginalized in the north, find no special refuge in the empire. Though not openly persecuted, they are viewed as unreliable. They are given jobs, but not influence. They are watched. Their languages are restricted. Their communities remain on the margins of imperial life, never fully absorbed, never fully trusted. For others, the pressure is internal. The absence of freedom does not always feel like a chain, but rather like a narrowing. Over time, choices shrink. Festivals grow quieter. Colors fade. A child grows up not knowing their grandfather's stories. A village forgets how to dance. A region, over generations, becomes something new, not by force, by forgetting. Imperial peace is not loud. It is not joyful. It is slow, efficient, and controlled. Those who live well under it are those who adapt, who do not question, who do not dream too far beyond their station. A clever baker may thrive. A poet will likely starve. Still, when compared to the chaos of pre-imperial life, feudal lords, bandit raids, religious inquisitions, many prefer Nilfgaard. They may not celebrate it, but they survive it, and for some, survival is enough. In the next chapter, we will explore the whispers beneath the silence, the secret orders, loyalists, spies, and rebels who resist Nilfgaard not with armies, but with hidden intent. Not all opposition to Nilfgaard is visible. Beyond the empire's columns of soldiers and beneath its clean, regulated cities, another kind of conflict moves quietly, without banners, without battlefields. It is the resistance of silence, the quiet war. Across the occupied territories, resistance takes many shapes. Some is passive, some is deliberate. A school teacher continues to tell her students stories from the old kingdoms, even as she teaches imperial doctrine. A blacksmith hangs a symbol of the northern lion inside his shop, behind a curtain. A farmer plants rows in a forbidden pattern, an old sign of protest, no longer spoken aloud. These acts may seem small. They are small, but they are also something else. They are reminders. Memory under occupation becomes a kind of resistance. When the empire asks for uniformity, even a whisper of difference becomes a risk and a statement. Larger resistance groups also exist. They are rarely organized on a national scale. Most form in forests, mountain passes, or border towns. Former northern soldiers, displaced nobles, defiant peasants. They use sabotage, misinformation, and the slow drip of disruption. Their goal is not victory, but persistence. Nilfgaard does not ignore them. Its intelligence network is vast. Agents gather information, often without uniforms, without names. They live among villagers. They listen. When resistance is found, it is not publicly displayed. There are no trials, only sudden silence. The Empire does not explain. It simply removes. Because of this, rebels adapt. Messages are hidden in patterns on pottery, in songs, in carved wood. Contact is brief. Meetings are rare. Most cells work alone, not trusting even each other. Secrecy is not a habit. It is survival. Within the Empire, dissent also exists. A minor clerk delays a shipment. A military officer turns his eye from a known sympathizer. These are not traitors. They are simply tired. Tired of watching silence imposed on everything that once had voice. Not all resistance is noble. Some acts are cruel. Retaliation comes. Innocents suffer. Revenge replaces principle. But the struggle continues, not because it is clean, but because it refuses to end. The hidden war is not about overthrowing Nilfgaard. It is about not forgetting that life existed before it, that there were stories, gods, songs, families, names, and for as long as someone remembers, the Empire has not won completely. The Nilfgaardian Empire brings peace. This, on the surface, is true. It brings roads that do not crumble within a year of being paved. It brings aqueducts and sanitation systems that reduce illness. It brings storage silos that prevent grain shortages and rationing programs that distribute food in times of scarcity. It brings courts that enforce law according to procedure, rather than favor or bribe. And it brings armies that are disciplined, regulated, and held accountable by codes. To many, especially those who lived in the unstable fringes of the northern kingdoms, these benefits are not abstract. They are real, daily improvements. A safe road, a predictable tax, a guard who does not steal, a letter that arrives on time. For a peasant, for a merchant, for a midwife or a miner, the Empire may appear, at first, not as a conqueror, but as a system that finally works. And yet, for all its order, for all its calculated structure and efficient governance, there remains a question that is quietly spoken, though rarely answered. What is the price of this peace? It is not a price paid all at once. It is paid slowly, quietly. It begins with the changing of words. Local dialects are discouraged. Children are taught to read and write in Imperial Nilfgaardian. Over time, village names are altered to match official maps. Old terms are replaced. What was once a river called Mirel becomes Linear 9. What was once the summer festival of Ashwield becomes Third Quarter Agricultural Gratitude Day. The change is not violent, but it is total. Temples are not destroyed, but they are inspected, approved, realigned. The teachings of local faiths are reviewed. Altars are moved. New rituals introduced. The fire remains lit, but it no longer warms in quite the same way. Art continues. Music continues. Even poetry continues. But it is watched. Certain themes are discouraged. Certain words vanish from publication. Painters are funded to depict imperial victories. Musicians compose anthems to the emperor. The past, so rich and uneven, is pressed into a single, smooth form. For the Empire, this is harmony, a unified culture, a consistent people, a future without the divisions of the past. And in a sense, it works. Crime falls, trade increases, schools function. Families no longer fear roaming bands of unpaid mercenaries. But peace, true peace, is not simply the absence of chaos. It is the presence of meaning. And this is where the price begins to show. In a town under imperial rule, a child knows exactly what to expect each day. They know what time school begins, what will be taught, what answers are correct, what holidays are recognized, what decorations are allowed, what plays will be performed during the New Sun Festival. But what the child does not know, cannot know, is what their grandparents' stories once sounded like. The ones that were told without revision. The ones that were passed down from village to village, shaped by wind and fire, not by policy. In the Empire, there are few surprises. This is a comfort to many. But over time, it becomes a stillness, a life without sharp edges, a world without spontaneity, predictable, safe, and numb. The small things disappear first. The name of an old hill, the recipe for a stew, the way a certain folk song ends. Then come the larger things, a festival cancelled, a marriage custom changed, a story forgotten. There are those who adapt easily. They thrive. Merchants who comply with imperial tariffs benefit from regular customers. Scholars who echo the official line receive grants. Artisans who accept imperial commissions build statues for public parks. And there are those who comply not because they agree, but because they are tired. Life, even a quiet one, is full of demands. Feeding a family is difficult. Saving coin is difficult. Arguing with history is more difficult still. And then there are the few who resist, in silence, in private, in small ways, a whisper behind a closed door, a prayer in the old tongue, a meal prepared the way it once was, without note or permission. For these people, peace has come at a cost they feel, each time they walk the streets of their own town and no longer recognize the walls. They are not angry, not loudly, but they are not whole. The Empire does not punish happiness, but it defines it. It permits laughter, but only in certain places. It rewards memory, but only the kind it approves. Every empire dreams of permanence, of a time when conquest is no longer needed, because there is nothing left to conquer, when borders no longer shift, because all lands have been drawn into one, when opposition is no longer feared, because the idea of opposition has been forgotten. Nilfgaard, more than any other power in the world of The Witcher, builds itself upon that dream. It is not the dream of power for its own sake, nor is it the hunger for glory or praise. Nilfgaard, at its deepest level, does not imagine itself as a dominator, but as a foundation. Its emperors, its ministers, its architects and record keepers, they do not build palaces only to be admired. They build systems, systems meant to outlast them. Codes, roads, courts, and rules, and meant to endure beyond generations. The Empire seeks to become not just history, but environment. And so, the question arises, what does Nilfgaard become when conquest ends? When the last province has been catalogued? When the last dissenting tongue has gone quiet? When the map no longer requires updating, what remains? The answer is not simple. The answer, perhaps, is silence. In its imagination, Nilfgaard becomes eternal. An empire not defined by expansion, but by stillness. An empire whose success is no longer measured by wars won or kings deposed, but by the absence of change, by the absence of interruption, by the unbroken continuation of its logic, generation after generation. A child born into such a world would not know the name Redania or Kedwin. They would not remember the time when village elders debated law, or when mages ruled their own schools. They would know only structure. They would know the imperial calendar. They would know how to present their identification at a checkpoint. They would know which streets are permitted for festivals and which are not. They would not ask why. The machinery of empire would continue to turn. Taxes would be collected. Reports would be filed. Trade would be measured. But beneath the numbers, something would shift. Slowly, quietly, without alarm, without war to justify its discipline, Nilfgaard would face a question it has long postponed. What is it for? Conquest defines purpose, but peace tests it. In this peace, cracks would emerge, not dramatic, not loud, but real. A noble house, grown rich from imperial contracts, begins to question the need for such strict central oversight. A provincial governor, respected by locals, grows bolder in interpreting law. A university funded by the state quietly reintroduces regional history in its curriculum. These are not rebellions, but they are changes. And change, in an empire built on permanence, is the first erosion. Even Emhyr var Emreis, if he lives to see such peace, may feel it. Not as failure, but as drift. The machine works. The grain moves. The reports arrive. But the sense of direction begins to blur. The great purpose, the need to shape a chaotic world, fades when the chaos is gone. And so, the empire would begin to turn inward. More effort would go into internal measurement, more policies to regulate daily life, more standardization of culture, of language, of behavior. Not because new order is needed, but because the empire cannot stop ordering. Without new enemies, it would begin to police its own shadow. Art would be further simplified. Religion more strictly supervised. Memory more carefully edited. In trying to remain perfect, the empire would begin to repeat itself. And repetition, over time, becomes decay, not collapse. Nilfgaard would not fall with fire or thunder, but it might become hollow, like a building still standing, but long abandoned in spirit. Some within it would remember the old ambition, the dream of stability, of peace, of harmony. Others would wonder what was lost in the making of it. And yet, despite all this, Nilfgaard would remain. Every empire dreams of permanence, of a time when conquest is no longer needed because there is nothing left to conquer, when borders no longer shift because all lands have been drawn into one, when opposition is no longer feared because the idea of opposition has been forgotten. Nilfgaard, more than any other power in the world of The Witcher, builds itself upon that dream. It is not the dream of power for its own sake, nor is it the hunger for glory or praise. Nilfgaard, at its deepest level, does not imagine itself as a dominator, but as a foundation. its emperors, its ministers, its architects and record keepers. They do not build palaces only to be admired. They build systems. Systems meant to outlast them. Codes, roads, courts, and rules, meant to endure beyond generations. The empire seeks to become not just history, but environment. And so, the question arises, what does Nilfgaard become when conquest ends? When the last province has been catalogued? When the last dissenting tongue has gone quiet? When the map no longer requires updating, what remains? The answer is not simple. The answer, perhaps, is silence. In its imagination, Nilfgaard becomes eternal, an empire not defined by expansion, but by stillness. An empire whose success is no longer measured by wars won or kings deposed, but by the absence of change, by the absence of interruption, by the unbroken continuation of its logic, generation after generation. A child born into such a world would not know the name Redania or Kedwen. They would not remember the time when village elders debated law, or when mages ruled their own schools. They would know only structure. They would know the imperial calendar. They would know how to present their identification at a checkpoint. They would know which streets are permitted for festivals and which are not. They would not ask why. The machinery of empire would continue to turn. Taxes would be collected. Reports would be filed. Trade would be measured. But beneath the numbers, something would shift. Slowly, quietly, without alarm, without war to justify its discipline, Nilfgaard would face a question it has long postponed. What is it for? Conquest defines purpose, but peace tests it. In this peace, cracks would emerge, not dramatic, not loud, but real. A noble house, grown rich from imperial contracts, begins to question the need for such strict central oversight. A provincial governor, respected by locals, grows bolder in interpreting law. A university, funded by the state, quietly reintroduces regional history in its curriculum. These are not rebellions, but they are changes. And change, in an empire built on permanence, is the first erosion. Even Emhyr var Emreis, if he lives to see such peace, may feel it, not as failure, but as drift. The machine works. The grain moves. The reports arrive. But the sense of direction begins to blur. The great purpose, the need to shape a chaotic world, fades when the chaos is gone. And so, the empire would begin to turn inward. More effort would go into internal measurement, more policies to regulate daily life, more standardization of culture, of language, of behavior, not because new order is needed, but because the empire cannot stop ordering. Without new enemies, it would begin to police its own shadow. Art would be further simplified, religion more strictly supervised, memory more carefully edited. In trying to remain perfect, the empire would begin to repeat itself. And repetition, over time, becomes decay, not collapse. Nilfgaard would not fall with fire or thunder, but it might become hollow, like a building still standing, but long abandoned in spirit. Some within it would remember the old ambition, the dream of stability, of peace, of harmony. Others would wonder what was lost in the making of it. And yet, despite all this, Nilfgaard would remain. Power is not always held by armies or laws. Often it is carried in something quieter, something that slips unnoticed into daily life, into speech, into writing, into the symbols we see but rarely question. Nilfgaard, in its unending desire to shape the world, understands this deeply. Long before a province is conquered by force, it is prepared by language. And long after an army has passed, its banners remain, not just on buildings, but in minds. The language of Nilfgaard is not poetic. It is structured. It favors clarity, brevity, directness. It avoids metaphor. It discourages ambiguity. Children learn it in school books. Clerks write it in triplicate. Emissaries speak it with practiced formality. To adopt Nilfgaardian is not simply to change how one speaks. It is to change how one thinks. A northern peasant, asked to translate a local saying into Nilfgaardian, might struggle, not because the words are complex, but because Nilfgaardian leaves little room for suggestion, for layers of meaning, for old superstitions or regional flavor. A phrase like, "the wind carries the heart," has no place in a system that prefers statement of intent received and logged. And yet, over time, the change occurs, not through force, but through practice. Children correct their parents. Shopkeepers replace hand-painted signs with imperial standard placards. Town criers read from scripts sent by district offices. The old words fade, not erased, but simply unused, forgotten like a path overgrown. Alongside language, the empire introduces symbols. The black sun on gold is everywhere, on documents, on uniforms, etched into coins, stamped into bread. It represents not warmth, but constancy, not comfort, but presence, an abstract reminder that the empire sees all, covers all, endures all. The architecture speaks the same language. Imperial buildings are functional, rectangular, balanced, unadorned. They do not celebrate beauty. They embody control. Stonework is precise. Doors are uniform. Interiors repeat. In such spaces, one feels not lost, but watched. Even time is regulated. Nilfgaard introduces its own calendar, its own holidays. The year is divided into imperial quarters. Regional observances are moved, renamed, or merged with state ceremonies. A harvest festival once marked by songs and fires becomes Food Collection Day, Q3. People adapt. They always do. They repeat the new phrases. They mark the new dates. They nod when asked to recite the imperial pledge. And yet within them, something else lingers. A grandmother hums an old song, no longer remembering its words. A trader refers to a road by its former name, then quickly corrects himself. A child finds an old coin and asks why it shows a lion, not a sun. The empire does not punish these moments. It records them. It studies them. Language, to Nilfgaard, is not merely communication. It is a diagnostic tool, a way to measure progress. If the people still say blessings of Meletele, then the temples have not yet done their work. If a village still uses the word freeman instead of citizen subject, then education reform is incomplete. Everything can be categorized, everything can be charted, but not everything can be controlled. Because language is not only taught, it is felt. It grows in silence. It hides in lullabies. It returns in grief, in love, in laughter. And while Nilfgaard reshapes the world's speech, the world, in small ways, resists. A scribe adds a flourish to their letters. A teacher tells two versions of a story, one official, one remembered. A new song uses imperial vocabulary, but its melody belongs to another time. The empire does not fall because of this, but it does not fully win either. Symbols fade, language shifts, but memory endures. And in the end, perhaps that is what matters most. The black sun may shine across the world, but in the quiet spaces between words, another kind of light remains.